I am here again with Laure Jackson. Hello, Anne.
Hello, great to be with you.
A little bit of a minor pause last week, but one of the things I really wanted to touch on first, before we go where we thought about, was something called the Beach Band. Now, Carl Beach from Christian Vision for Men, Edge Ministries, The Gathering, amongst other things, was eating a double decker one day and found himself tapping his wrist. He's got young onset Parkinson's disease, and what he struggled with is the ability to speak. So you probably know the medical bit better, but he would, like, his voice would start to go hoarse, and then he'd start to get a bit of stuttering or stammering would come in, and then he'd get really tired, and the frustration would build, anxiety grows, and then his ability to communicate just drops off. So he found a tapping technique of some sort, which then enabled him to speak, because it sort of messes with the brain's. This is where I sort of look to you. It does something with the brain, interrupts something, so he can then talk.
That is interesting and fascinating, and it would be, yeah, I'm curious to find out more about what that actually is. There's certainly something that if you are struggling cognitively with something, which is what part of Parkinson's is, and neurons are lost and certain neurochemicals aren't functioning. But there's a sense of perhaps there is a shift of engagement, like mentally, so that you're concentrating on something else, so that you're much more able to flow because you're not concentrating on actually having to speak. But I think there's probably more going on underneath it. But because I don't know, it's the first I've heard of it, it's going to be interesting to see exactly what they think is going on, because it's potential that it's going down the route of energetic medicine, and that's possible. And that, so I'm curious. Like, as I said, I don't know where he's at with that, or what exactly it is, or whether it's more of a cognitive thing, a thinking thing, that the brain is distracted on other things. But I suspect, knowing what the word tapping means, that it's possibly more heading down the energetic medicine, which is really interesting from a faith perspective, because most of that ties into Eastern religions, but not everything does, because God is a God of energy. So it's a fascinating, interesting sphere to talk about. But do you know any more about it yourself,
Yes, I
or?
do, because I've
Ah,
just interviewed him. So he's basically created. It looks a bit like a smartwatch, that so it goes on your wrist, and it vibrates at a certain pulse. And what it's doing is interrupting something. And when I was interviewing, I was in tears, because as he was talking, his voice was going hoarse, he was getting quiet, he was starting to stammer and stutter. And then he switches on this thing, and it starts to vibrate on his wrist, and all of a sudden, his voice is immediately there. It's not hoarse, and he's able to talk. They've had consultant people looking at it, and they're saying this is like a medical breakthrough, because it's really delicate. It's not medical, so it's not got side effects like, taking tablets.
yeah.
Parkinson's UK have now got behind the project, because what they're discovering is it basically relaxes you in some sort of way. They're not quite sure how it's doing it, but what they discovered is that Parkinson's, for example, the classic thing is you think of somebody who can't speak very well. Well, it's sort of relaxing him that he can speak, and when he turned it off, all the voice symptoms came back again. PTSD, they're finding some help with that as well, because it relaxes people and all the anxiety that builds. Atrial issues, palpitations, for example, which I definitely was interested in, because it relaxes and helps you. It sort of takes your mind off the anxiety, which then means you relax, which then helps the symptoms. And that's where they're finding all these different symptoms. And all these doctors and consultants are really fascinated, because they're saying, we've never seen this, the effect of this. And I was chatting with them, they just says this has got to be a good thing, because it's so simple. It's so nondescript. It just looks like a little tiny smartwatch with a little vibrating pulse thing, which enables people with Parkinson's, so far, not guaranteed 100%, but it's helping them to speak again.
That's really fascinating. I'm really glad that yeah, what I was saying that totally goes in line with it. And actually, vibration, that's different. Okay, it's like slightly different, but it's the kind of frequencies that send out through vibration. I use vibration a lot in therapy. It's a beautiful thing to help with regulation, which again is calming the system, organization, yeah, of organizing your own body. There is so much that we haven't, or little techniques that we haven't yet brought into the mainstream. This is one of them. Obviously, the therapy that I do has been out there for some time, but it's how we use it to change behavior. But vibration. if you can handle it, there are negatives to what it can do to muscles, but if it's a light thing on your
Mm.
wrist, then that should be lovely. But it's about the frequencies and the way that that works in the body, which
He
is
did.
really similar actually to the auditory
Okay.
processing. But
He
carry on.
said the frequency is really important because if you go too fast or too slow, it doesn't have any positive effect. So what they've been doing with an oscilloscope is getting the frequency right so that when it vibrates, and like they said, don't just use this all day. That's not going to help you. But if you really need to be able to speak to somebody and you just switch this on for 5 minutes, you're able to then communicate freely. All of a sudden, this is why they're saying this is why Parkinson's UK are saying this is a game changer. This is enabling people with Parkinson's suddenly to be able to communicate for short periods of time so much more clearly.
It will be really interesting to see, yes, if there are certain types. I mean, obviously, young onset, because Carl came over earlier this year, maybe, and I heard him stutter, and just the difficulties that he was having, even with walking, and going up the stairs. So it'd be really interesting if we can get more research on that. This would be phenomenal because I'm not sure every single Parkinson's person. Obviously, it just depends on quite how far the brain is, all the rest of it. But just to
Yeah.
have something that certainly gives people hope, and then to be able to use it on small occasions, and that's what we find with a lot of sensory processing, is that you use it for the occasions that you need it. If you use it all the time, so one of the things that we do is use weighted garments or compression garments. For those who can't feel their body, they're a bit clumsy, or maybe they are overreactive and that don't like the feel of touch. They hate wearing their clothes or certain clothes. So we would say, put on a weighted jacket or wear some compression clothing, but you don't want to do it all the time because then you lose the effectiveness of having that. And I think it sounds as though that's a similar thing because they know that the Parkinson's is there all the time, but this can help in this circumstance. Until we get to the point where we will receive complete healing.
The video for that, if you wanted to watch that, is out yesterday. Because what day is it now? It's Tuesday, isn't it? We're recording this, so that actually came out yesterday, Monday, the 23rd of September. That's on our YouTube. You can actually see it in action, which is just, if you've not seen this thing, it's amazing. He is doing it as basically as low cost as possible. I think he was looking at maybe 15 quid or something. Because, like he said, medicine is really expensive. They wanted something that can be available to everybody, rechargeable really easily, lasts so many hours, and yeah, it's amazing. Right now, we talked about senses all the time, don't we? We talk about the five senses that we tend to think of, which I'm now furiously thinking, can I remember even the five senses? So we've got sight, we've got touch, we've got hearing, we've got taste, and we've got sight. No,
Smell.
smell. Yeah, okay. So those are the five basic senses. And when we started this nearly a year ago, we talked about how there were other groups of senses as well. So we thought it would be a good idea if we do a series on, we'll start with the five basic senses, and then we can go into the other senses. We thought that would be quite fun.
Mm.
So, what sense did you want to start on?
Well, as we moved into auditory, we can. There's
Yeah.
a new blog out on the website anneljackson.com about the auditory training program that I do, but there's lots of things that you can do to help. But there's also so much more to auditory processing than a lot of people realize because people naturally think about hearing. That's the most obvious thing. We're always thinking about how deaf someone is or what you can actually hear. But there is so much more to auditory processing, really.
I guess the fact you're not saying hearing is sort of a big clue that it's not just literally I suppose the sound waves that we think of, it's not just about sound waves going into our ears, because even I'm very conscious that actually we feel sound. I mean, bass is a really good one because you can feel the bass from a speaker coming through your body, but actually it's much more than that because, I mean, just really basics. What exactly is going on in the ears when noise comes in around us that we can then physically process that noise into hearing? I mean, what
Oh,
real basics? What happens?
it's just remarkable. Yeah, so the frequencies come in, and the way that we've got the cilia, which are like the hair cells on the inside of the cochlea, which is just behind, there's a big bump. The hardest bone in the body is the big bump behind your ear, and that is there to protect your hearing system and your vestibular system because they're actually right next to each other. So you've got the hearing system, which feeds into the vestibular system, and the two of those share the same kind of jelly that's all in that area 2. So yeah, anyway, the frequencies come in, and then through that process, it gets converted into kind of like electrical currents. Unbelievable design. It's just like, how on earth does that happen? But it goes all the way around. You've got higher frequencies picked up in a certain part of the cochlea. It's like this little snail shell that's inside your ear. As the sound travels round and round and round. And so certain, you come in and it's really big, and then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And there are different avenues in that cochlea that pick up different frequencies of sound, to be able to get that lovely rich interpretation that our brain then, we can pick out a beautiful oboe from a trumpet, or if we're speaking quietly in a whisper, or if we're shouting really loud, we can discern those differences. And that's where I come in.
Okay, so that's the real basics. I I didn't even know about the hair thing. I thought there were little bones in there that vibrated. I wasn't a million miles away.
Yeah, you go through the bones to get to the actual yeah, because and they're held. You've got the two bones that are held by this tensor tympani muscle. And that's one of the muscles that we need to work on, especially if someone's quite floppy, for want of a better word, in their body. If there's not a lot of tone, and they might be more low toned, you might find that the hearing might be affected too, because that little muscle might not be as tight as it is. So one of the treatments is about how can we get into the ear to tighten up that little muscle that holds the bones together, that vibrate and then go to the eardrum, which then passes through the eardrum into the cochlea. So yes, I was dealing with the end of it, not the way that it gets funneled through the actual ear, because we've got such a bizarre design of an ear. I still don't understand all that. So someday, some scientist is going to work out the absolutely and utterly remarkable design and why our ears look as funny as they actually do. But that is all to funnel the sound in. Yeah.
So when we think about like a megaphone, which is a cone shape, you speak into one end and it gets louder. It's kind of the opposite of that, isn't it? It sort of gets bigger and then it gets smaller. But I'm thinking about a speaker. If you get a really posh, expensive speaker for a hi-fi system, you don't have one cone of sound. You might have several, and each cone is pushing out a particular range of frequency. So effectively, it's badly mimicking, as best as we can, the design that's already existing in our ears. Is that about right?
I imagine so. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Most of the time we have a look at what's been made, what creation has for us, and then we try and make sense of it and then think, oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that. So we're just copying the master plan that we have in nature for us. Uh-huh.
Cool. Okay. So when I'm talking about feeling sound, actually that's more true than I thought. I thought feeling sound because you can kind of feel it in your vibrating in your stomach or whatever, but actually it is vibrating. That's the beginning of the auditory process, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Depending
Okay.
on how light and what frequencies you're dealing with. So when you've actually got a treatment program, an auditory program, ours goes through all the frequencies that we hear as humans from 0 to 20,000 hertz. So to make sure that the ear, that little muscle is working well at all levels, and to try and get those cells in there more attuned to being able to process that information well. It may not actually be the physical ears may be working absolutely fine, but it's how we need to tune the brain to modulate and moderate and discriminate what's going on with that information that it gets sent in each and every frequency, so that we can pick out things in the background, so that we can discern what they are, the differences between a P and a D. Don't know how clearly that came over for those on radio. If you're watching my lips, it's a lot easier. So all those subtle nuances and picking out the sounds that you want to in the background. So if you're out at a restaurant, you want to be able to focus on the conversation that is right in front of you, of the person that's right in front of you. And for some people, that's really hard. If you've got background noise, they don't have that auditory figure ground, that auditory discrimination to be able to focus on what they want to. So they really have to look at the person to be able to match what's being said with their mouths, as well as what they're hearing.
Thank you for giving us a bit of an overview, because just that overview highlights so many potential issues just from a physical health perspective of if you've got your ears blocked or that gel stuff is drying out or there isn't enough of it or the hairs have got broken or the bones, misaligned. Already there's so many potential physical issues that can exist that I guess some of those can be put right, some of them can't. So let's get back into the auditory processing part then. So and that I mean, I sort of given a clue, I guess, but hearing is so much more than just hearing because already we've talked about vibrations in the bones and all that sort of stuff. So how how would you then tune? Because I just think about a car. There's a computer, someone plugs it in, and they can tune the engine and make it better. How do you do that without a plug in someone's body in a laptop to fix it?
Well, we do kind of plug them into things that they can listen to. And that is that tuning, so that like they listen 5, 15 minutes a day to certain frequencies. And it's more like it's how to exercise the brain and the ears. Hoping that there is nothing physically wrong, because as you say, if you kill off your hair cells by listening to too much loud music, then you haven't got anything to work with, and it's you're just not getting the information into your brain in the first place. So if there is damage and hearing loss, so that's a sensory impairment rather than a sensory processing issue. So there's always an impairment or a processing, and I focus on the processing as best I can. If there is an impairment, we still do what we can for the processing, and there are sometimes that's just not that part of that brain is gone because there is a technical brain issue and the brain or the body just doesn't have those receptors in order to take the information to the brain. So what did you ask me?
Well, I'm see in my head now. I've got a picture of the ear and a weight, like doing an exercise. So that could be your logo for if you've got an auditory issue, you go see Anne. There'll be a little ear with a set of weights, doing some pumping some iron. Because effectively, that's what you're doing.
One of them, yeah, for
Well,
sure. It is, yeah. And then the rest of it's subtle. So we need weights on one side and then we almost like need a feather or something on the other. So that it's those subtleties of then, right, let's tune in. If you're going out for a walk, pay attention to what your ears can hear. If you think you can, because normally we just walk and that's it. We don't really pay attention. Children are very good at doing this because they might stop and listen to something, and you're thinking, what's that? But they're stopping and they're hearing a bird. So it's like if you are going for a walk, just stop for a moment. You might have the cars going past. You might have somebody strumming. You might have somebody shouting at somebody else. You might have hustle and bustle, the noise, whatever. But you might, let's see, can we find nature sounds? And that's a lovely thing. It's an everyday thing, but those little feather approaches to help you tune into things that are around you. If your hearing itself is fine.
so you're talking about the weightlifting bit. That's my little pictogram for that one. But you're trying to get the muscles in the inner ear that are holding the bones and the hairs and all that in place. You do the weightlifting bit, so to speak, by getting someone to listen to a particular a frequency range, and
Yeah.
that
Bit by bit.
that helps it to strengthen somehow.
Yeah, because that's it. It's just like, I mean, if you're trying to do a push up or a press up, the first time you do it, there's not a lot there. And the same with listening to that frequency. There's not a lot of registration. A lot of what we do in sensory processing is we have to get the senses recognizing, registering, or just being able to pick up the sound to begin with. Then you need to be able to start interpreting what that sound is. So you don't overreact to the sound, which some people will. Obviously, they'll put their hands over their ears because they're particularly acutely aware of certain sounds. Or some people might not register that sound, although their ears can actually hear it, they're not registering it. So they're not paying any attention to it because it doesn't mean anything to them. Their brain doesn't know what to do with it, but the ears are working fine. So we've got the very start of it, which is that are they overreacting to it and will run away, or they'll scream, or they'll make noises themselves, or they'll shout, or they'll hum, or they'll sing? Or there's ones that you call their name and there's no response. It's as if their hearing's fine, but they're not responding to you. Then we move into the discrimination side of it, which is, can we pick out things in the background? Can we concentrate if there's noise on in the background? Can we pick out the differences in the B's and the D's? all the different nuances. Can we pick out an instrument? Can we pick out this voice rather than that voice? Then you got the discrimination. Yeah. So it's like we have to slowly exercise getting the brain to register, because if you can't register the information, then it's very hard to discriminate. So by doing those gentle exercises, we get the registration up, so that people can actually then do something with the sound that the brain has then recognized that it has received. We just need to now perceive, we need to interpret it well to then function better.
So the noise is coming into the ear. We sense that from vibrations, but if the brain is somehow, I suppose, again, get back to cars again. If the brain is somehow misaligned, it's not necessarily going to associate a trombone as a trombone. It'll just hear a noise it effectively doesn't understand, and therefore what you hearing is not what everybody else can hear. So it's starting to make sense now. But the audio processing part is it's about, I suppose, getting the brain to see a bit like a laser. If a laser is going to point at a laser, it's got to be exact. Like fiber optic cables, it can't be out a lot, otherwise it just doesn't function. The information basically misses. As I suppose, in a sense, part of what you're doing through your therapy work is getting those cables realigned so that the audio can come in and then the brain hears it, and then the brain knows what to do with it, which I suppose is the first part before it can then become emotional. Because music can move us, can't it? And sounds can make us happy or sad, and fearful, rejoice, whatever. But it's more. Okay, there's a lot going on there, isn't there?
And that's why when all the information goes in, it goes to the thalamus in the brain. And then from there, that's really closely linked with the limbic system, which is the emotional system. It has our memories, and it has the higher order cerebrum, has the language involved. So that's where, as you say, connecting a trombone sound to a trombone word, and maybe that makes you feel good, or it doesn't, or you remember, oh, actually, yeah, that my granddad used to do that, or all of that stuff starts to come into play in the middle of the brain. So we take it externally from these senses, start the processing, taking it into the brain, and then it connects with a whole load of other areas as part of the brain. That's why the brain has developed. No, has been created as it is, because you actually can't develop bits of our human brain without the other. We just wouldn't be human. So that's a lovely thing to know. Our brains had to be created all in one, because they just wouldn't function.
So as we get older, I mean, we've talked about, you brought up the issue of too loud music. I mean, headphones are classic. I wear headphones, but always try and get as quiet as I can because I like my hearing. But if you have a really loud music, it's going to damage your ears. I guess it's just speeding up the process of the damage to the body that would naturally happen over time. But if you're older, of course, it's the same end result, which is that you are less likely to hear. My granddad worked in a cotton mill, so he was always partially deaf because they didn't know about hearing loss as they should do. Fought in the war, didn't have hearing protectors. So, he was not deaf, but, his life had sort of robbed him of some of his hearing. He could still hear, but you kind of had to raise your voice a bit. Otherwise, he wouldn't hear you. But is that just sort of an advanced version of what we can do to ourselves with loud music? Because it then destroys the hairs.
Yeah, it speeds up the process for sure, because that's one of the only cells. Like, I mean, our skin cells, they replace every 3 weeks or so, but the hair cells don't.
Oh.
I think it's one of the only areas in the body that actually doesn't regenerate, as far as I've been told, as far as I know.
So somebody comes to you. I mean, obviously, there's going to be, an assessment from you. You're saying, well, okay, what's the reason why you've come to see me? But if it's an audio issue, how do you? I mean, what do what do people see when they come in and say, I can't hear something, or someone says that's a trombone and I thought it was a car engine? How do you then take that to, okay, that's a trombone? We know what that is now. How do you do that bit?
That's the process. It's a combination of doing the weightlifting, doing the weightlifting, and then having little exercises, like little feather exercises, to try and get the brain to tune in to various things while you're working on getting the system better through listening to specially modulated music. So back in probably the 40s, Alfred Tomatis was most of our auditory training programs are based on his work, where he understood that the frequencies in the ear also affected the body. So that's also really interesting that I've had children really beautifully when they go on some auditory training, that they're then more coordinated. And I think that's because of the link between the jelly and the way that the brain interprets sound and movement and vibration, and the vestibular nuclei in the back of the brain at the bottom are connected to the auditory pathways in the nervous system as well. So if we're just a remarkable creature, really.
I'm finding this really fascinating. I mean, we started saying hearing, but hearing is more than just what goes in.
Yeah.
Yes, that's going to be a part of it, but it's what goes in, how your ear physically deals with the sound waves, I suppose, and frequencies, and then it's got to go into your brain, which then needs to understand that, well, that noise is a trombone, that is a crying baby, that's a car revving, and it associates. But you talked about hearing a trombone and knowing the word trombone and associating. Is that part of this as well, that we have kind of a like a word association thing going
Yeah.
on from a sound?
Yeah, so we've got to work on cognitive. So I always work with sensory. Check what an impairment is there, if possible. See if there's anything physically going on that can be fixed or not be fixed. Then we move into the processing side of it, seeing if we can get the brain connecting, getting those cables as tight and as neatly, because it's not going to function if your cable's not well joined up. It just needs a bit of a click sometimes, and that's what the therapy does. Let's get those cables connecting. Let's get those electric wires, those impulses connecting as best we can to that, but also around the brain, because that's why we need it to be motivating. We need it to be enjoyable, because our brain isn't just single track. Our nerves just don't work single track. We have nerves firing out into lots of different places. So we do that, and then we link it with making sure there are no negative emotions associated with anything. And we also then have to work on the cognitive thinking side of it and the speech side of it, if they can actually say the word or can recognize it visually. It never ceases to amaze me how complex we are.
Yeah, I, I, I'm genuinely fascinated by the hearing stuff. Partially because I work in radio, so it's kind of everything we do is about what people can hear, and you know that we haven't got the function of putting subtitles on a radio, so it's literally what people hear or don't. Which is why we don't like actually big silences, and we're quite careful about the music we play, and the levels between things is always something we're looking at and trying to make as good as we can, because unlike a TV that you can watch, and like you said, you can see someone's lips coming together. That's, well, it can't be an S because the lips are together. You know, we can see those visual clues, but with radio there isn't that luxury. So people could be watching this on YouTube right now, or they could be listening to the podcast version or originally on the radio. But unless we're using diction and clarity, people don't have the visual clues, which is why someone like you can help that work better. I'm not wording it very well, but because I just find it really fascinating.
I think it's completely fascinating, and there's always so much to learn. There's so much that we don't know, but it's nice that we can do something with what we do know.
Yeah, my silences are just dumbfounded at the awesomeness of the ability to hear something. And we say hear like it's a really simple thing. Oh yeah, I heard this. And yet hearing something, I heard someone say that they're going to go to the shops. And all of a sudden we're connecting shops with cream cakes or car journeys or music, and all of a sudden just hearing them speaking is so much more than just the words they use, because there's the way in which they use it. It's our association with what they're saying, the way they use the words. I saw a great thing one day about fonts matter, and it was I love you, and it was one was like blood pouring down. You're thinking, okay, that's one way, and there was another one was this lovely gentle font. And it was just the point that the font that we use, even to say exactly the same couple of words, I love you, but all of a sudden, if you stick blood pouring down, it's like a horror film. But if you
Mm.
don't, it's a nice, simple thing. But even more so with auditory, because it's feeding our emotions.
And that's where we have a problem with text and email communication. That's why there are so many issues that have come out, because we can't hear the tone in which it's written. We can see the words and it's just type, so we don't have that visual, as you say, that's a real visual trigger. But we don't have um tone, which is that such a powerful point in emotional, in auditory processing, is the tone and those frequencies and the aggression in which things come across, or the gentleness with which things come across. We just totally lose that if we don't have that auditory processing, or we then can't identify and perceive and use the right language to describe what it is that what we've heard. And that, so I was just distracted there because I've realized I put things the wrong way around. The eardrum is what picks up the frequencies first, because of course it's like a drum. So you bat your drum. I think I just said it the other way around. So like in my head, I'm reversing it in what's going on. So just to clarify that, yeah, it goes through the eardrum first, and then you've got your little hammer and all the rest of them ossicles to work.
See, sound really matters. My family know if I've had a really annoying email because I have a touch type keyboard, which is like ultra silent quiet. I mean, you really you can't hear a thing. When they hear that keyboard banging on the table, they know I've got an irritating email to write, because they can hear the noise of me banging away on the keyboard, even though it's basically absolutely silent. It's a really posh keyboard. But when they can hear the thing of me tapping, oh, Dad's had an email he's going to sort out. If that,
Yeah, the subtleties. It'd be really interesting. Yeah, it's just fascinating to see how much we actually do pick up from our ears without even realizing it, until it's brought to attention. Then you think, oh yeah, yeah, not a good time for that.
oh, we can use emojis in text and emails and stuff, but I remember watching somebody using it was for people who read Braille, and it was like this machine thing, and all the letters, they basically stick their hands on the keys, and it sort of they pops up and stuff, and they can read. I thought, well, if you hook up that app to your emotions and you're listening to it back, you could actually get like how hard the keys are being pressed, like pushing up for you. Then you can get emotion, because then you got some mechanical, but we need that mechanical element. But the ear is effectively mechanical.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. My brain's firing off in all sorts of places because this is really fascinating. Right. So we will do a series on the 5 basic senses, which we've touched before. That there's more than that, but we'll start with those. We've done auditory. So if we've done auditory, then there's smell, there's taste, there's sight, and there's touch. Is that right?
Uh-huh.
I didn't say it twice this time. Good. Okay, we'll go through those 5, which we understand, the 5 basic senses. I remember teachers at school, there's 5 senses. And I'm looking back thinking, yes, there are. That's not untrue, but there are more than 5.
Yes.
So we'll work through those.
Brilliant.
Right. I love the makeup of the ear. It is so precious. And what really gets me is not just how amazing the design of the ear is, it's the fact that, like you said, it's the one part of the body that, as far as we're aware, the hairs don't grow back. So the ear that you have when you're 85 was knitted together in your mother's womb, and it's been there the whole time, and it grows with the body somehow that works. And it is mind-blowingly amazing, the design of that.
Mind-blowingly.
Is that a phrase? It is now. Right. Thank you, Anne. If you want to know more about Anne Laure Jackson, you can find out on pure247radio.org/ALJ, pure247radio.org/AL and J, and it will take you to Anne's website and more. Thank you, Anne.
Oh,
And
that's
we'll
great.
touch on another sense next week.
Super. See you then.
Right. Bye for now.